I'm sure we are all familiar with the quote, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter," by Martin Luther King. I think when he said it, he meant more as things that mattered as people, like us mattering and like racism back then. But I think that could also be used towards like animals, because we all know about animal cruelty, and we know that happens all the time. And I think that just because they are animals, it doesn't mean that they don't feel. They do feel. So I'm sure most of us have had pets in the past. And if we don't, then we've always wanted one. I know myself, my mother never let me have a pet. And I always wanted one, but now I understand why she never wanted me to have one. It's because you can begin to neglect an animal without knowing it, like without intentionally doing it. And that is called passive cruelty, where you don't really intend to do it. You just kind of, like if you own a pet and then you forget to like feed them or walk them, I mean, they just become depressed, or they will starve. They begin to starve, and they become dehydrated, and they develop like infections, and sometimes pet owners don't even realize that they're overweight, and then the collar starts to grow into your pet's skin. So, or if you don't provide adequate shelter for your pet, it's all pretty much neglection. And if an investigator was to see the kind of the case and seeing it, they'd say, oh, okay, like this person didn't really intend to hurt the animal, but and then they would just kind of try to educate the pet owner and not really remove the pet from the site. But then there is another type of cruelty called active cruelty, when you do it with bad intent. And the following pictures, I tried to choose some that weren't so gruesome, but they're still kind of hard to look at. So these are all animals that have suffered from abuse from their owners. It's deliberate or intentional harm that is like inflicted into the animals, just because the pet owner is trying to show them like some sort of power, not just like towards the pet or anything. They're just trying to like demonstrate it to the family, kind of to intimidate them and say, "Oh, I hold the power and I can do such and such things." And it doesn't make any sense to hurt the defenseless animals, which, you know, love you unconditionally. It's more psychological with pet owners. It's some, like, if they've had problems in the past or whatever, they try to just express themselves whatever which way, and this is just definitely not the way it should happen. So it's just trying to prove power towards himself. There's also hoarding, which we all know when we were like in elementary and we'd walk to school. We all knew the crazy cat lady down the street, and she had like 20,000 cats. Well, she probably thought the cats needed her to survive. She loves them, but she doesn't really know that she was probably hurting them because she wasn't providing an adequate shelter. Usually those houses were very messy and dirty, and it's filthy. It's not a very decent environment for them. They really don't provide care. So that's also another psychological thing with the pet owner, because they think that they need the pet and the pet needs them, when it's absolutely not true. And then the most disturbing to me personally is bestiality. It's when the pet owner or just person has like an attraction with a pet, with an animal that's not human. And there are actually several states where it's not illegal, it's not a felony, doesn't matter, there are no consequences for the people who are like hurting their pets in a sexual manner. And there are just several things like with pet cruelty, like poisoning and shooting. I mean, not here in California per se, but maybe in the more rural areas where, you know, you just let your dogs loose and the neighbor might poison them. It actually does happen. The most common types of animal cruelty happen to our cats and dogs. That's why I'm kind of presenting this. 64% happens to dogs that are hurt, and then 18% cats, and 25% others. However, of the 64% of dogs that are hurt, 25% of them of the cases involve pit bulls. However, awareness is being raised, like Humane Society and PetAbuse.com, and we all know of PETA, but PETA kind of tries to save like animals from being stripped for the fur or whatever. But these are things we all see everywhere all the time in our own neighborhoods, which is something we can all raise awareness and just know that it's going on, help prevent it maybe.
So, Carl, what did you think?
Well, I thought you had an interesting use of intention getter. I felt you used it very well. I didn't find the purpose statement very clear, but you got your point. You had a really good use of your visual aids, I thought. They connected you with the speech. Lacked in cited sources, I think. I didn't hear much. Also, I would have liked if you explained why pit bulls were 25% of dog cases. It kind of just left it there. And somewhat, you just kind of ended it. You didn't leave us in with a conclusion, so it was just kind of abrupt. But overall, I think you knew your topic, you spoke out very well, you connected with the audience well, and it's a good speech.
All right. Yeah, I like the quote too, and I like the first visual that brings us in emotionally on the subject. I do agree that you're a little bit vague exactly what your purpose statement is going to be. There's not really a preview of what the content's going to be, and you dive right into the first section, which is about the passive cruelty. How passive cruelty is defined needs a source citation, and you've got some random examples that you're talking about. How frequently does it occur? I don't know. Does it lead to death? You say it could. Again, there's not really much quantification on it. There's not any expert that's talking about this in your presentation. So it really sounds like it's sort of a general summary of what you think passive cruelty is, as opposed to something that you've done some research on. And I think that's a little bit problematic. I can see then that there is a transition to active cruelty. It's not a smooth transition, but it's definitely clear because you pointed out. And then you've got the visual that goes along with it that suggests that there are these problems that are really pretty substantial. Again, I think you need some source citation on this. There are some numbers that come up later on that I think you need to give us a source citation for and a little bit more explanation on. Like Carl was saying, he wasn't quite sure why pit bulls make up 25% of those abuse cases, and the answer is pretty straightforward. Michael Vick's out of jail. Right? You're kind of talking about the cat lady and that sort of thing. It sounded to me like bestiality was going to be your third point, but you basically talked about it for a very brief amount of time, just a few seconds. And I'm actually thankful that we didn't have to hear more about it. It does seem odd to me that it's not a crime in some states, and I think that you ought to tell us what those states are so that we don't ever travel there, because that just sounds really kind of creepy. The statistic that you present at the end with all the percentages, again, that needs a source citation also, and I think it might have worked better if it had been integrated into the speech about the different kinds of cruelty rather than kind of coming at the end of the presentation. Your delivery, look, I think your voice is pretty effective and you speak to the audience for the most part. It does look a little odd, though, that you're leaning on the demo station the whole time, sort of like you're disengaged instead of